se antes era o homem que vagava pelo mundo, agora é o mundo que vaga pelo homem. E com essa ideia, ele procura o mundo dentro de si. Knausgård produz, portanto, a revolução tão anunciada na escrita contemporânea. A morte de Deus e a consequente valorização do eu, como medida de todas as coisas, levaram a humanidade à construção de uma ideia do eu como um pequeno Deus, perdido em seu caos particular. Com Knausgård, nos reencontramos com um eu agora iluminado, e não mais reduzido pela psicologia e pelo catálogo das doenças mentais da psiquiatria, não mais recortado e organizado pelos cadernos internacionais dos jornais, pelos noticiários das TVs. Estamos falando de um eu que tem que ir aos supermercados, trocar fraldas, dirigir, lavar louça, limpar o apartamento, levar o lixo para fora, interagir com os vizinhos, que fica bêbado, vomita, briga, ama, trai, sem que nenhuma dessas tarefas o diminua. É uma entidade ontológica que não se apequena diante dos fatos, como quem os imagina que provenham de uma dimensão metafísica transcendente. Não há outra dimensão em Knausgård. Nele, a morte, citando, não era mais que um cano que vaza, um galho que se quebra ao vento, um casaco que escorrega do cabide e cai no chão. E, no entanto, não se trata de explicar o mundo. O pensamento é supervalorizado, ele diz. Não há mais no mundo do que isso. Como diz a respeito de Dostoiévski, o escritor que talvez mais se aproxime de seu projeto literário, são muitos os ventos que sopram através do homem, e nele existem outras formações além das profundezas da alma. O que Knausgård parece nos dizer é: cada um é responsável pelo que faz, pelo que pensa, pelo que fala. E há um terreno comum entre nós, construído pela linguagem. Mas esse eu contemporâneo, por outro lado, não é menos cruel do que o Deus do passado. Porque é um eu que, para existir, precisa expor todos os personagens que interagem com ele. Precisa mostrar aos homens de boa vontade que a vida privada era uma coisa do Deus que tudo via, mas guardava segredo. Do Deus que existia nas cabines de confessionário. Este novo eu, que surge, por assim dizer, primeiro na Noruega, vive da nossa própria carne e só pode existir quando todos os outros existem. Nessa poética da honestidade, Karl Ove não está preocupado em saber tudo o que é possível, nem se deixar levar pelas imprecisões da experiência. Para ele, citando, escrever é retirar da sombra a essência do que sabemos. É disso que a escrita se ocupa, não do que acontece aí, não das ações que se praticam aí, mas do aí em si. Aí. É esse o lugar e o propósito da escrita. Mas como chegar a ele? Este narrador de Knausgård não é um super-homem, não é um excêntrico, não é um pária, nem também alguém com mais privilégios do que os demais. É um narrador que procura construir de forma verdadeira a experiência do humano no mundo. Não aquilo que não foi, não aquilo que poderia ter sido, não a repulsa do que é hediondo, apenas a aceitação do mundo como é, a realidade que, enfim, existe conosco e por meio de nós. Can I call you Karl Ove?
Yeah.
In most of the 5 My Struggle books, we see this main character trying to be a writer. At some point, he managed to write a novel inspired by an experience he had before in the north of Norway. Before and after that, he keeps thinking that he not only wants to be a writer, but he wants to write a great book. Maybe even the great book. So first of all, are you the author of My Struggle? And Karl Ove, the character of the books, the same entity?
It's a good question. There is an enormous distance in the book when I'm writing about being, 16, 17, 18, because so much have happened, and these books about being present. So I try to be present in the mind of a 17 years old, and to be present, you have to be above somehow. But I try at the moments I am in a present terms, I tried to be as much me as possible, you know. So there's many layers in this book. And I think the notion of writing a big novel, that is the thing that makes it impossible to write a big novel. The idea is, you know, it's devastating, is an impossible thought. And this book is based upon trying to make something very little, you know, as a way of coming under it and just write, you know. So, yes, that's me, knowing that that's the way to write. Not to write a big novel, but to write. And the character in the book doesn't know that, you know. So there's a difference there.
When, in which point and why, did you realize you would have to be as much autobiographical as possible in order to write it?
Yeah. This book, you can never tell where a book starts, really. It could, you know, but this book, I knew I had to write this book when my father died. That was in 1998, and I was 29 years old. And it happened in the summer. And I had just finished a novel, and it wasn't published. It was my first novel, and I was so extremely proud of it. And I was going to read the proofs when he died, so I brought the proofs with me. That was completely silly, because I realized then that my first novel I've written to him. That was why I was reading it, so writing it. So it all felt, you know, completely meaningless. And I tried for 10 years to write about that situation where my father died. He died under very dramatic circumstances. He was very alcoholic. He lived with his mother, and she was alcoholic too. And she hadn't been. She was kind of, to this day, through mother and son sitting there drinking, wanting to die, I think. And we came down there, and it looked like hell, you know. And I wasn't aware of it. And I wanted him dead because it was, you know, I hated him somehow. I came down there, and I realized I was just crying and crying and crying. It was very sad. And I think this I have to write about. And then I saw his body, and this I have to write about. So there's one personal thing and one more existential thing about death. And then I tried for 10 years, you know. I mean, like every day, tried to write it. And I couldn't, because I didn't believe in it. Because it didn't represent the real experience, exactly how it was, you know. And then after 10 years, I kind of say, you know, I was very desperate. And I kind of say, fuck this. I've just tried to write it as it was. All the names, you know, everything, every detail. And I started, and I sent it to my editor, and he kind of, he called it manic self-confession, because it was kind of wild. I just throw out my innermost secrets, and it didn't work. But then I tried to dramatize it, you know. It's like a dramatized diary or something. You have one very deep level of intimacy, and then you have a drama or a story, and then somehow it worked. And then that was my aim, to write that book. But then I kind of had a language. I just continued, and I write 5 more about my life. So it wasn't like a plan I want to write about myself. It was like, how can I tell this story in a way that is true for me? That was the thing.
You write at some point about Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and so many other writers. And we keep thinking that in the 19th century, it's easy to see writers showing themselves in their work, like as a present voice, as a conscience in the book. You see that in War and Peace or Les Miserables and so on. But during the 20th century, we learned that the author was dead, that we could not do that anymore. The language was what was important. Yeah. But in the past years, we've seen this notion of autobiographical fiction taking the literary scene. And you are associated with that, wanting or not. Could we say that finally the author has resuscitated?
Yes, I think there is many levels there. There's always been people writing, you know, in this way. But when I studied literature, that was in late 80s, early 90s, it was all about structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstructionism. It was all about language. And the idea was that everything outside of the book was somehow, biography or wasn't relevant. It was the language and the relationship between, you know, things, and it was like almost the unconscious layer of the writer was what you were there to explore somehow. And it's very interesting to read books in that way, and I loved it, and I still do. But it, for me as a writer, it was very sterile, and I tried to write in those ideas when I was in my 20s, and it, you know, it wasn't connected to life. And I thought my life is so pathetic and so little and so small and insignificant that I can't write about it. I have to, you know, to make something that is art, you know. But then I read this incredibly good diary for Witold Gombrowicz, and he's writing very much about art, and he's, you know, this is really, really good stuff. You should all read it if you haven't. It's one of the masterpieces of last century, I think. And he writes about art, and he said, like, art is, it is something very big we have, and we try to fill it, you know. It's like we have ambition to fill it, and that's what art is. But life is going on down here, you know. And he thinks there is death. Art is death, because there's no life there. And I was reading this, and I was thinking, you know, this is true somehow. And he's also writing about Heidegger and his philosophy. You can't imagine Heidegger, you know, do something banal, doing the washing up, or it's like he's a complete different sphere. Life is, you know, very abstract, very, you know, high in a way, but life isn't. So it was very much these ideas that matched my own and gave me courage. Okay, I'll just write about these banal things. And I think all art always about trying to reach life somehow. And even those, you know, those books without an author, but it's just a different kind of life somehow. But these things goes in waves, don't they? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But now we've seen, we're talking about that, that we read your books and we keep thinking ourselves, is this true?
Yeah.
Is this the real Karl Ove?
Yeah.
And we want to know you, so we go to the internet and we Google you and we see you talking and
yeah.
we read your interviews. So in a certain way, it's almost like you were the company for the book. We can have only the book. We need you as well.
Yeah.
So in that sense, one thing is related to the other outside of the book as well.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And I don't like that personally, because I don't want to have it in my life, so to speak. But it's these books are about the relationship between life and literature. And when I was writing about characters that was alive, journalists could call to the you know, the characters in the novel, and I did. The reaction from that and the experience from that came back again in the other books, you know. So it goes from life to literature to life to literature. That's you know, the path. And this is a kind of a very strange experience for me, because the other books I've been writing, people can come over to me and say, you know, I liked your book and it's a good book or whatever. But these books, people come over and talk about their lives. So that's a completely different thing, and in a sense, it's very, very meaningful. It's almost like the most meaningful experience you can have. And it's not about the book, it's about the life. It's about my life and their life. And it kind of is a meeting point in literature somehow. And I don't know why that is, but it's very, very strange and feels like, yeah, there's a value in that.
There's the scene in book 4 where you have this friends in Norway, and you've left something that you've written before on your desk.
Yeah.
And when you come back, you see that they wrote another paragraph.
Yeah.
Like almost like a parody.
Yeah.
Of what you were trying to do, and then you feel like you feel devastated by that experience of someone trying to someone reading you and being able to say, "Whoa, this is Karl Ove, and I can do the same.
Yeah.
I can mimic him."
Yeah, that was terrible, absolutely terrible. but they who did it didn't know what they were doing. They had no idea how much identity and you know that had to do with writing at all. I never thought of that scene, but it's true. It's in the book, and it was very important. And it's the same thing now. I mean, if I see there's a lot of parodies of me going on, and there's a lot of people mocking me, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of surrounds the books, and my face is become some, you know, almost like a printed poster or something, and it's an experience that is very much our time, I think, and I want to write about that one day, sitting by yourself, writing about your own life, and then kind of you see it out there, and it's alive out there, and it's completely strange, and it has nothing to do with me. It has its own life, you know. And I think all the mass media, all the social media, all that stuff is changing things and making things move in, you know, different ways than it did when I grew up. But the core of what I'm doing is literature, and my way of resolving this is said I don't care about it, just let it happen. I don't look at it. It's the book that's the thing, and I have to write new books. You know, I don't really. So I have to stop talking like this too, and I will do that. I tried for many years now, but I will in the end.
And you said that this is going to be your last book tour.
Yes,
talking
it is.
about my struggle.
Yes,
so
it is.
You're having this very last experience of listening to Karl Ove talking about my struggle.
Yeah.
In a certain way, you've managed to write a piece of fiction that is unescapable for every living writer. Even the ones who didn't like the project feel that they have to respond to that in a certain way. And in the other hand, you have a lot of writers who believe that you not only achieved a great thing or wrote a masterpiece, but you showed a way of doing that. So in which sense do you believe you really showed a way for literature, for contemporary literature, and how you deal with that in your own writing, the writing you're doing right now?
Yeah, that's an insane, absolutely insane thought, you know. I have been, all these years, I've been reading other writers that I admire, you know, living writers now, and I have been sitting on my own, in my own house, doing these small things about my own life. And I've never thought that, you know, someone should say something like you just said. It's an impossible thought for me. I can't really relate to it, you know. And then now I keep meeting those writers, and it's a complete collision of two worlds. And I think that's the trick with the books, is that there's no ambition in it. It's no ambition. I don't want to do anything. I just want to write, you know, what's on my mind or what's important for me, to go where it burns. And in that process, I found my own voice, which worked for me, you know. It's like it's a bit of storytelling about nothing, and then there is some essayistic parts, and then there is some daily life, and then there is a floating thing in the writing. So you could have could be like 300 pages with no paragraphs, and it's kind of moving, and it's all improvising. It's if I remember something and I just go down there, and I stay there and go up, and it's all intuitive. And I think I do that because I've been trying so many years and been failing every day. If you go to work every day and fail at your job, it's terrible, you know. And I did that, and I think all of a sudden, if you just start to write, clear your mind, try to be free, you could just follow your intuition and write. So I've never thought of finding a style, never thought of doing something new. I've just tried to make it work, you know. And there is a way of, I believe life is like that. I believe like you could have discussions of whatever, and at the same, or think about, you know, hardcore art or hardcore philosophy while you are in a supermarket buying stuff. And I have this openness in the book, And I'm accused of being a narcissist and so on. But if you really read it, you see the world is flowing in and out all the time, you know. So I can't, this is what I do. I can't relate to what other people are saying or doing. And I wanted to be free. That was my aim. I want to be completely free when I was writing. That means that you have no self-criticism, basically. Self-criticism, you know, can cripple you completely as a writer. So there's then you have to accept being banal, accept being stupid, facing your own stupidity. You know, then you can then you can write. But now I've done that, so now I have to do something differently, because I have to find something interesting for myself that I haven't been thinking of before when I'm writing. And now this style is too common for me, so I have to try to change. That's very difficult, but I'm trying.
You write, I believe it's in volume 1, that you realize that you spent your life trying to combat fiction, writing fiction, and then when you realize that wasn't the best way of doing that, you've managed to find your project.
Yeah, somehow, yeah. And the new project is, you know, this project is very much inward, very much about the soul and the psychology. So then, I know it's very long, so the next project is very short. It's only one side, a text in one side, and it's about things and objects. It's no psychology, it's no soul, whatever. But I didn't move, you know, terribly far away. It's just things that I have in my surroundings. So it's more like a much more indirect portrait of me, but it's incredibly fun to write about. Mm-hmm. If you see a toothbrush, for instance, you think you can't say anything about it, can you? What can you say about it, you know? And then you just start to write, and that, you know, you come there's something you can say about all the things we are surrounded by. Have something, you know, and it's fun to do that. I don't think it's very good because it's not my heart and soul, but it is interesting at least.
We get the sense when we read your books that you have a very refined sense of structure. You migrate from essayistic prose to the creation of scenes and dialogues, sometimes long dialogues, 30 pages, 40 pages. You give a lot of attention to details, to the scenario, of building the scenario around the characters. And at the same time, you say that writing was intuitive, that you were just sitting there writing. But was all that intuitive, or did you plan along your writing? Did you revise it? Did you?
No, this was a, you know, there was a, yes, I wrote first 1,200 pages, which is basically the 2 first books. And I gave it to my editor, and we were discussing how to publish it. 1,200 pages is maybe too much for one book. We could maybe do it in 2 books. And he suggested then that we publish it as 12 books, 1 each month, which was an incredibly good idea. And it completely liberated me. In the end, we decided on 6. So then I published it in a year. So then I had to write 4 books through that year, which is a lot. And then I said, okay, book 3, childhood, book 4, adolescence, book 5, student days, book 6. The 5 first books is a circle. It begins with the death of the father, and it ends with the death of the father, book 5. And then book 6 is about the consequences of this series on the people who I've been writing about, and the moral consequences, and, you know, the consequences of my wife and my family, and so on and so on. So that's the structure. But everything inside that structure is improvised. It's like if I imagine myself 10 years old, walking down the street, someone is coming on a bike, and then I remember a scene, and then I'm writing that scene, and then I remember something else. And when I started book 3, that was especially difficult because it's about childhood. I didn't have more than, you know, like, I don't know how many, maybe 10, 15 very important memories, and then kind of nothing else, and a few photographs and so on. And that's what I have in the beginning. And then I just start to write, and it's like it opens up and opens up and opens up, and then I realize I remember so very much, but it's not present in the consciousness. It's subconscious, and And it was the same when I was 15. So I think there's so much inside of us that we don't use, but it's there, and you can get access to it. And I think writing is one way, reading is another way. I mean, it's like if you're reading a scene about someone completely stranger, and there is a description of a smell or a sound, and wow, there comes a rush, and you remember how it was, you know. And there is absolutely no planning. And the first book was edited normally, but then my editor realized this is not a normal project. We just publish them, you know. So there is basically no editing in those books.
I was reading the book too, on page 106 in the Brazilian edition. Well, we were reading that you were late to dinner and you had to buy groceries for dinner, and you're very upset that you're late, and that takes 20 or 30 pages. And then suddenly you meet with your neighbor, the Russian woman, and you start writing about her. And you come back to the scene 240 pages after that. And I was tracking when is he coming back to the scene. And I was wondering, well, was that planned or not? So you just tell.
No, it is if there are some writers here, it is a kind of I think a common writing experience. You have a narrative story, you have a story, you know, and if the story is strong, you could just leave it for maybe 10 pages, 15 pages, but then you have to go back because you have to continue the story, you know. Mm. And in my first novel, I was kind of experimenting on how long can you leave it before you have to go back. Mm. And in this second book, I really wanted to see if it was possible to leave it completely, you know. So there is no main story, but there's many layers of sub-stories. Mm. And that was, I always wanted to do that. And I think, yeah, it's almost an experiment in prose. And then, you know, what is the thing that pulls the reader in? What is storytelling? What is the thing that you want, you know, why do you want to read more? And I have no idea. I was reading so much thrillers when I was a kid and a teenager, like, you know, MacLean, Wilbur Smith, Desmond Bagley. It was like I was reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. And I think if you do that, there is a kind of a storytelling. They are so good in storytelling, you know. Mm. And I have never thinking of this consciously, but I think, you know, it could be as exciting to go to the refrigerator. You think, you know, what is in the refrigerator? Mm. Is it more milk? You know, and then you go and then you open it, and that could be like 15 pages, and we still will wonder what is in the refrigerator. And there is kind of attention to it. There is a kind of attention in it. And then you had the diaries, of course. I've read diaries, could be 50 pages about gardening. Mm-hmm. In the garden, roses, there's nothing going on, but you still are kind of hypnotized by it. There is something, you know, you want to be with in there. And I think that's the self, another self. And if that self is completely honest, it is, I don't know why, but I love reading. I love being with people in diaries. There is such a comfort, and also could be very interesting on some levels, yeah. Mm-hmm.
In a more pedestrian level, I'm sure most of the audience wants to know that, and it's a question we keep thinking when we're reading your books. Can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? How long did it take to write the 6 volumes? How was your writing schedules? Did you write more than what you used in the final books? And because in book 5, you mentioned that you tried once and you were not satisfied with the result, and then you started again and again. So
that was book 6.
Book 6.
Yeah, the first 5 was very straightforward. Yeah, but I could tell there was the first 8 pages of book 1. I think I spent 8 weeks on writing them. And the whole of book 5, which is 500 pages, I also used 8 weeks on. And, you know, I was speeding up somehow. So every book got faster and faster. And the whole idea behind the writing is, I'm so full of self-criticism. I can't hardly write. But if I write quickly, it's like if I have to write 5 pages a day or 10 pages a day, there is no time to be critical. You have to take what you have, and there is a kind of a liberation in that. And that's the technique in the book. Try to write as fast as possible every day. And you come into a kind of a rhythm for each book, which is different for each book, and that the rhythm is the important thing. So I was just writing incredibly quickly.
And in book 1, you mentioned that you were taking 5 hours a day just writing, and you have to write at least 5 pages, I guess.
Yeah.
And if you would write 5 pages in the first 20 minutes, you have 4 hours free. But if you didn't write, you have to come up with 5 pages in the last minutes. Did you keep with that process, with that routine, the entire project? And do you still have that?
I have this thing that we had 3 children. So there was 2 things. There was get up early, write, take the children to nursery, go back, write, pick up the children. That was the rhythm. But you can write like 8 hours a day, which I did. And then at the end of things, I could go away for a week and just write around the clock. But to do that and to be able to keep it as it is, you have to, I believe, all the work is in the failure before, the years of not getting it right. And then that's kind of the labor is doing in failing. And then the writing is kind of easy when you get to the writing. So the hard part about writing is to get to a place where it's easy to write. And that's very difficult.
Can we say finding the voice, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Or getting the voice, speaking the truth.
Finding the voice you believe in. And I have written I think I must have 800 pages or maybe even more with beginnings, like 1 sentence beginning or 1 page beginning, and just trying. And now I've learned that I have to trust it and just keep on writing. And then I just wrote a novel, and I thought the first 30 pages was terrible. But I realized I have just to stay in there. And when I continued, the beginning gave some meaning, and it worked somehow. So I think self-criticism is the worst thing.
There's a good question here from the audience. In your books, music is always very important and very present. And what are you listening now? Do you ever hear Brazilian rock or Brazilian music at all? But extending that, there's also the sense that pop rock in the 80s, and I think you try to do that, putting together the daily routines, the pop rock, and also high art and high philosophy. So how is that all related? And don't forget about the Brazilian music.
No, I haven't really been listening to Brazilian music, and I'm sorry for that. But that's a kind of a. I'm very unsophisticated when it comes to music. I listen to the same things as I did when I was 10 years old, and I have developed in all other areas, but not when it comes to music. Yeah, I've been so interested in pop music, rock music, and and when I was a teenager, it was such a big part of my identity. So it's all in the books. But I think music is a kind of metaphor for literature when it works, because it is about rhythms and movements, and what music does, it goes straight to the heart. It doesn't go through your head. You don't have to think about it. Why do I like it? You like it or you don't like it. You feel something or you don't feel something, and that's kind of an ideal for me in the writing, to have that, access to the heart. And that's very difficult. But that's what I want. So I envy musicians and I envy painters, because they don't have to be, conceptual or intellectual or thinking too much. It's very directly.
In some way, your experience with pop music is not very far from our experience during the 80s, and I'm sure you will find you have found the same thing in the U.S. or in the rest of Europe.
Yeah, very much so. It seems like everybody was listening to the same kind of music in the 80s.
Which that's something we can relate, like not not the landscape perhaps, but the music and the things we're going through. Well, there's another good question here. You've been to Henry Marsh, the neurosurgeon operation in Albania. You'll talk about that. A flip. And you wrote a piece to the New York Times, in the New York Times, later on, where you said that when you saw the brain in the microscope, you felt as if I'm quoting, you felt as if I were standing on the top of a mountain, gazing out over a plain covered by long, meandering rivers. And at Flippy, you said that that experience was a changing experience. You felt like you were looking into the universe inside of the brain. Would you say that, well, I can say that, but I want to hear that from you, that that's the same kind of experience we have reading your books? Like we're getting so much inside of this character that we can find the whole universe in that.
Yeah, and I think the main thing when I saw the brain that was opened and I could look into it was that it was so concentrated, so dense. It was this here, you know, and I can't think of any novel. You know, it could be like there are some novels that have this almost crystallic quality to it, you know, which I think more and more I want to write. Try to compromise something to make it, you know, like very, find one image, you know, like that for something. And I think my book is, you know, so spreading. It's the opposite thing. It's like the world breathing in and out much more. But it's so little of me in that book. And now it's 3,500 pages. But so much more in life, you know. That's incredibly strange, but that's really how it is. Yeah, we are so rich in that way, full of experiences in life, and no novel a novel can only scratch on the surface of that. That's why we need those kind of images, or, you know, crystallize pieces of art, I think.
Well, there's a question on writing or learning writing. You said recently that John Foss was your only true writing teacher. What did he teach you?
I have so much respect for him because he never done a compromise in his life. He has been true to his way of writing and his way of thinking, and he doesn't do compromises. It's no commercialism, there's no sellout. You can't find no sellout in him, and he's a very strong writer. And I admire that, because I feel myself, I have this sellout thing going. You know, it's like what he learned me was that to be true to yourself, true to your own writing. And he learned me about really, really great writers, which I never had. I was like 18, 19 when I met him. I haven't even heard of them. And he was the one who introduced me to them. And that completely fucked up my own writing for 10 years, because I thought, this is good literature. You know, what I'm doing is crap. But then I kind of come over to the other side and realize, okay, but I'm just writing. And then I find my own thing, you know, which is what he was teaching in the beginning. That was what he was saying. But you can't just hear it and do it. You have to experience it yourself, and that could be a long process. But he still is. he's the best Norwegian writer and probably the best Scandinavian writer, I think, still.
There's something related to that. There are so many questions, and we won't have enough time for all of them. But someone wants to know that it's really difficult for a Brazilian reader to find contemporary works from Norwegian authors, especially the ones you mentioned in My Struggle. Do you think your writing is helping to change that scenario around the world?
I think it is changing in England and in the US, for instance, because they are so protective of their English language. It's so hard for foreign writers to get access to the readers there, you know. And I have a sense of that is changing now. I mean, a Norwegian for them is like, yeah, it's very far away from them. But it still is discussed. The books I have been writing and other are discussed, and I think it is a sense of that things are opening up, which is very good. In Norway, we have this small language, so we have always been very important for us to translate books and to have books translated, you know. And in Scandinavia, it's like that. But yeah, I hope it's changing. And I got to name some Brazilian writers when I came here. I asked for that, and I will try to read. And someone was saying that it was here. It's happening now. It's here. It's happening. And that's very exciting to hear. And I have a publishing house myself, so I'm always curious and want to look for things.
Did you publish any Brazilian writers there?
I haven't.
Yeah.
I wanted to publish Michel Laub. I read his book. Diary of a Fall, which was so brilliant, and I asked for the rights, but the rights were just sold, so we couldn't take it. But it come out in Norway, you know, so...
Yeah, it's an amazing book.
Yeah, it is.
Well, the last question here. What does writing have to do with doing analysis?
Good question. I think the strongest writing has nothing to do with analyzing things. If you read the Bible, there is not a single analysis of anything. There is not a single abstract thought. There is no theory about anything. It's all simple stories, you know. If you read Cain and Abel, it's like, I think it's like 12 paragraphs, 12 sentences, or it's very, very short. But it's the story about brothers, it's the story about murder, and it has been talked about and discussed, and there is you can find out new things in that little story in 2,000 years. You know, it's like an abyss, and there's no analysis in there. You know, and that's what makes it great, makes it alive, makes it possible for us to read it now. So I think if you have storytelling or narrating, if you have an essay where you explain things, you can reach this level, and if you just tell a story, you could, you know, reach to this level. And I'm absolutely certain that that's how it is, because there's so many things you can't explain, but you could have it in the book, unexplained, you know. But you can feel it. You could use all your other senses and somehow understands it in a different way, or not understands it at all, or whatever. But I think, I think that's another weakness with my writing, because there is so much analyzing in it, you know. But there still is storytelling on the side.
You managed to mix them both, right?
Yeah, try to do that. Yeah.
And one thing that comes to mind is your concerning on metaphors. You care so much about them, and coming from this Nordic tradition of great metaphors in the ancient literatures, that I assume that was very conscious from.
Not very much from that. My idea of metaphors comes very much from Marcel Proust, because he used them in such an extraordinary way, you know. It's like if there is a metaphor, you know, we have description of, something like this, red seats, many people sitting. And then there is a little metaphor, as this is like the sea, it's like sub-ocean level. That's just a metaphor. But then he kind of creates that world, and he starts and he writes maybe 2 pages about life under the ocean, and then it comes back to this. And then you see all this in a kind of a completely different way, you know. And he uses that all the time. Like he creates, there is a time here, and then he creates kind of holes through metaphors. And it's a technique he uses. So it's like he can level through metaphors. So it's like metaphors is a passage to, you know, different times or different worlds, and then he goes back. And I saw that when I read that book first time, and I thought, this is, you know, this is not only a way of organizing a novel, it's a way of looking, you know, it's a way of looking on the world, what it is to be, what time is, what history is, what, you know. And that's only in the metaphor.
And in book 5 also you write that conscience is only the surface, right? Which is very interesting.
Yeah.
Related to that, to analyzing things and doing
exactly.
metaphors.
Yeah.
Trying to go further than just writing consciously.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much for being here and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you very much for being so attentive. Thank you.
Obrigado.